Ecstatic to have another guest as we go into season two. And we have Kara Tupy, and she's the co-founder of Farm Teach. She's also a part of the online education leadership program where I teach at Harvard Graduate School of Education. I should also say that Kara is doing some wonderful work with me and the team at the Leadership Initiative for Faith and Education. And in some ways, that's how we got connected, along with being one of my students in the online education leadership program. But I am delighted to have her, and I'm delighted to have you join me as we engage in this conversation with Kara Tupy. Kara, it's great to have you. Why don't we just jump right into things? I'm going to kick it off with a question. And I'm going to ask you to just talk a little bit about your education trajectory. If someone were to ask you, what's the road that you took to land where you are? And we'll get into your role at co-founder of Farm Teach, but give us a little backstory, if you will.
Sure, I can do that. Thank you, Dr. Scott, for inviting me to this conversation. It's an honor to be here with you. And I've attended office hours a handful of times since I became a student, and this just feels like an extension of those conversations. So thank you for having me and creating space for this. Um, I I wear three hats, and I'll just kind of maybe give a brief summary of those hats and work my way backwards. I think it'll make more sense in terms of how I got here. So in terms of educational leadership, I currently serve as the Associate Director of Instruction for a charter school in the greater Sacramento area. We serve a diverse population of students in grades PK to 12, and I've had the privilege to walk alongside the school as it's grown from 2,400 students in its inception back in 2021 to 3,500 students. And my work has primarily resided in program development in response to the instructional needs of our students. I think my special sauce in that space is to see what is not yet as though it already were. And so in 2021, I was invited to launch an online high school. And then in 2022, in response to the governor's mandate that every child in California reads by third grade by 2025, a colleague and I launched an innovative literacy program with a strong family engagement component that centers parents in the literacy development formula using structured literacy. That year, I also launched an online junior high program, and more recently, I refocused our multilingual learner program to better meet the needs of our long-term and at-risk English learners to ensure that our students are graduating from high school fully literate and ready for college and career. I definitely think the success of these programs is due to the incredible leadership of the coordinators that I work with. They're some of the most creative and capable and committed educators I've had the privilege to work with. So my role really in this is more to coach and help remove barriers and to just sort of clear the way for their success. Um, I'm also a ministerial candidate on the ordination path in the United Methodist Church. And I serve on the administrative board as the vice chair of ministries and the lay leader at the table at Central United Methodist Church. And we have three campuses, our main campus in East Sacramento, a growing online community, and then kind of a surprise, a rather unique campus known as Table Farm. And Table Farm's in the Florin Creek neighborhood in South Sacramento, which is historically a vulnerable community. The farm grew from the dreams of an intergenerational team at the church to think about how we could gather with food in ways that would lessen the prevalence of isolation, especially during pandemic, and bolster a vibrant, sustainable community rooted in God's all-inclusive love. So what started in 2020 in response to the pandemic has grown into a thriving spiritual community dedicated to centering the ingenuity of young people and to collaborating across the generations. So in 2024, just as an example, we donated over 1,900 pounds of produce to an interfaith food pantry. And one thing we noted that was so interesting is that over the nearly 1,300 volunteer hours it took to keep this farm running, 64% of those hours were filled by youth. So for the past 3 summers, we've partnered with several funders to offer a paid fellowship for high school students that comes alongside what they're learning in school and invites these fellows to explore climate justice and identity and contemplative spiritual practices while growing and distributing produce to those who are experiencing food insecurity. And we know that faith and spiritual practice can serve as a protective factor in youth mental health. And that's actually some of the work you've introduced me to, Dr. Scott, through life, some of the work of like Dr. Lisa Miller. So it really brings me great joy to be part of this team at the Table Farm, exploring the intersection of education and faith and youth. And then I would say, last but far from not least, I'm the mom to 3 incredible teenagers and married to the most supportive and wonderful partner, Paul. In 2014, we moved to a farm nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills, a little over an hour north of Sacramento, in a not so successful attempt to grow our own food, but still somehow in between milking goats and growing broccoli, or maybe because of that, we did cultivate connection with land and neighbor and each other, and sort of bringing out of that experience in 2023, Paul and I, along with a lot of inspiration from our own kids' educational journey, we co-founded Farm Teach, a venture that will hopefully become a formalized 501c3 soon. Farm Teach seeks to close the opportunity gap for youth and to uplift livelihood in climate impacted communities. And we're in full-fledged startup mode, meaning we're doing everything from hiring to payroll, fundraising to program development. But I think what really keeps us grounded in the work is the people that we get to work with and the students who come here growing culturally relevant foods and internalizing concepts like the Pythagorean theorem as they build square corners for a fence. It's inspiring to be around this.
Oh,
Uh,
this is amazing. And I have so many follow-up questions. I really appreciate how you frame these three identities, sort of the identity around coaching and the support you do at the charter school there, the ministerial candidate, which you can hear in the way you talk about the role of faith in your life and the work that you do, and then a mom. And we're gonna before we end, we will have touched on all three of those with a follow-up question. Let me ask you real quick about one that you started off with, and it was fascinating. You talked about literacy program that engages parents. Um, Maybe 30 more seconds on the essence of
mm,
that program.
yeah. I have to give a shout out to Sarah Zuev, an incredible colleague who helped develop this program. I actually hope she will apply to OEL. So um, she and I worked side by side to think about what it would look like for parents to be a primary coach in working with their students in literacy. And we know that parents bring a wealth of knowledge and assets to the role of educator in the home. And so the program that we created, we use with both multilingual learners and with um, primarily English speaking families. There's scripted work that parents can do alongside their child, in addition to the instruction that they're receiving in a more classroom environment. So it's been a joy to work on that with Sarah.
No, that's powerful. That's really, really great. I can't talk enough, and we, of course, talk about this in our class, about the importance of deep engagement, not ritualistic or
Mm-hmm.
symbolic engagement on the part of parents, but deep engagement, finding ways that they can actually partner with the school and with their children. And this sounds like one of those. So you did the charter school work, or you continue to do the charter school work, but you also have your hands in the work around the ministry and food. Can you just talk a little bit about, because sometimes people
Mm-hmm.
think of educators as sort of, well, we're we're just educators,
Hmm.
but we find ways to do multiple things, and these various identities often intersect in beautiful ways. And
Hmm.
so, talk about where the faith spirituality sort of interests started, if you don't mind, and then
Yeah.
you have merged them with this food interest. Say a little more about that.
Hmm. I I think the thread that ties all this work together is entrepreneurialism, which is why I applied to the EDM program at Hugsy. So, um, you might not know this, Dr. Scott, but I didn't start my career in PK-12. I began in higher ed, piloting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Fun news. So I was part of a fantastic team of recent graduates who piloted a leadership development program in spiritual formation at a small private liberal arts university on the West Coast out here. And part of my story is that I was also raised in church. So I had an experience similar to a passage from the Bible where John the Baptist calls Jesus to the River Jordan, and a dove descends from heaven, and a voice is heard saying, "This is my beloved." And when I was 20, a university leader named Rick Sessoms invited me to step into the river. And I said yes to an internship. And 125 students said yes to my invitation to reimagine campus chapel services with students at the helm. So, word about this student led movement spread, the school began to grow, and we saw evidence of this student centered thing working. But despite all this, as my graduation drew near, I announced to my mentor, Rick, that waiting tables was really the extent of my aspirations. And he saw through my bluff, quite frankly, to this like sense of dis-ease that I had with a call on my life. And so he offered me a job as his administrative assistant. He had to convince me to take the job. But then he humbly typed his own correspondence and scheduled his own meetings for the next 4 years so that I could develop student leaders for the campus ministry. And this left an indelible mark on my life. The denomination that we were part of had no formal role for women in ministry, and
Mm,
Rick had to carve out a place for me. I'm not sure what he saw in me that made him fight so hard, but I think it's the equivalent of the heavens opening and a voice saying, "You are my beloved." And that experience has shaped me as a leader.
mm,
Um, but if I'm being honest, over the next decade, I doubted that sense of call, and I
mhm,
stopped trying to be all the things that I had to be to fit into what just felt like a patriarchal world of my denominational roots.
mm,
And so, to some extent, I left church and found a professional home in the PK-12 education ecosystem. First as a music teacher, then a classroom teacher, and then I really found my stride as an educational entrepreneur in the out of school time and in school settings. So it's really only relatively recently that I've been able to integrate um, what have felt like disparate parts of my identity to realize
mm,
and fully step into the work that I feel called to do, which, if I were to name, it's to cultivate space for young leaders to enact change in the world. And I see that happening both in educational and religious formational spaces.
mm,
So, like in one moment, this work calls me to apply entrepreneurial creativity to address systemic inequities in our educational system and even our religious systems. And then at other times, it invites me to be still and sit with others, to listen and engage in spiritual practices that ground the work that we do. Um, and I think the food piece was maybe accidental, but it has informed so much of the way that I view transformation and view transformation happening, whether it's been in my classroom or been through programs that I've developed. The regenerative piece of the way that we think about transformation happening on a farm, for instance, just has really beautiful ties into the work that I've been able to do in these other realms. So I think that's where those things come together.
wow. Thank you so much I'm not sure if I'm going to frame this as eloquently as I hope I could, but what I hear you saying is particularly like in some ways you saw what was happening to you in the church, a space, if I'm not mistaken, you attached the word patriarchal to, as like you had a calling there, but there were barriers there,
Mhm.
to you really living out that calling. But you never lost that sense of calling. And so you go to education, and you made a reference to the pre-K-12 education ecosystem, which I appreciate. That's the way we think about it. You found a space in the education ecosystem. And in many ways, you are fighting inequities that in some ways perhaps you experience yourself in this faith experience. Um, but it didn't that experience didn't completely douse the flame. It just
Mhm.
shifted where you were going to serve a bit in education.
Mhm.
Did I characterize that correctly? And what would you add to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you did a great job of characterizing it. And I think that um, one thing I'm very grateful for is that the church that I am currently a part of is all inclusive
Mm,
and really um, centers the work of centers my work regardless of gender, regardless
mm,
of really any of the isms we might put on things. And so that's been a very healing space for me. And then, finding that this also included work with a farm and education or all of the things kind of happening in one space, I think that really lit in me, kind of re-fanned into flame some of the earlier sense of call that I had experienced in my 20s. And so here I was, decades later, saying, okay, I want to do this. I want to audition for the role of John the Baptist
mm.
and say to those whose moment it is to step into the river, regardless if they've been pushed out in the past or seen as on the margins, to be able to say to them, it's your moment to hear your belovedness.
Beautiful. One of the things that, and you know quite well about this, but for our audience, one of the things that I'm working on through the Leadership Initiative for Faith and Education is creating spaces, safe
Mhm.
spaces, you could, perhaps you could also describe them as brave spaces for educators to do what you are
Mhm.
doing right now, to talk
Mhm.
about the role of faith in their lives as a source of whatever fuel for why they do it, a calling for why they do what they do, a sense of purpose, whatever they would sort of, however they might describe it. Um, Maybe a minute or so on the value you think that something like that might provide, given the fact that you're doing this right now, and it sounds like you've
Mhm.
had this sort of roller coaster experience around living this out. And
Mhm.
I'm talking about not only living it out, but being able to talk about it also.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are a lot of faith-based organizations out there and people like myself who are whose faith does inform their work, but we're doing it in sort of a siloed fashion. And there's this, um, in public classrooms, in public institutions, it's difficult to talk about faith in a way that feels there's just a line there that's difficult to know how to straddle as an educational leader. Um, but I think that like the work that I'm doing here with the nonprofit and the work at Table Farm is very much informed by my faith and a
Mm,
sense of wanting to upend some of the systemic and structural inequities that we see. And so for me, it does fuel the work that I'm doing.
mhm. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. So tell me a little bit about where you think Farm Teach might be in the pre-K-12 education ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, you know, Table Farm kind of is easier to answer because it really, as a faith-based organization, it
Okay.
resides in that PK-12 system, that the largest space there.
Hmm.
Um, but I would say that Farm Teach, on the other hand, it kind of moves beyond the PK-12 system into the technical assistance provider space.
Mm.
We serve PK-12 students by providing high quality educational opportunities, but our customers, if you will, are the schools and the school districts for whom we're providing those direct services. So complicating the work though a little bit more is that our funding, our payer, the one who funds our work, are have been governmental agencies. So I see us kind of even leaning into that technical assistant space even more as we develop resources and training for school leaders. So it is, uh, I think this illustrates the fact that we can move fluidly from one space to another within the ecosystem to best serve the needs of the students or serve the needs of the organizations that um, we work with. And really, even Farm Teach, as it's becoming a nonprofit, the farm itself, as a for profit business, has the potential to fund the work of the nonprofit. So that, that adds in like another circle there. So it's complex, but actually, I think that brings some health to the organization because there
Mhm.
are multiple ways in which we can grow and lean into revenue streams.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, in some shape, form, or fashion, Farm Teach is creating a product, maybe uh, like vegetables, produce, and the goal is that you would sell those things and that they will sort of fund some of the services that the program actually delivers. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. We have a summer fellowship program for high school students where they work for 4 weeks on the farm, and they're growing produce and protein, eggs from the chickens that lay. And some of those are donated to a local food bank, and then others of those, the youth are working to develop a mobile farm stand. And so these um, potentially do get to help fund than the things that are happening during the school year when students from like our local Chapman Elementary School, we had a group of ESN students who came and spent like the half day on the farm picking oranges and making orange juice and learning about the connection between the sheep and their wool and how that is used to mulch the orange trees themselves. And, they just spent this whole day learning with their hands how the farm works and being able to articulate that as a class and with each other. So some of that work of the farm production actually helps to then fund the services that we provide to school districts.
Very, very helpful. I love that description. And it sounds like the services that you provide to school districts um, is basically training for adults.
Yeah, so I would say that that's been an aspect of our work that has been fuzzy, that we're trying to
Gotcha.
get a little clearer because,
Mhm.
being a classroom teacher, I think when I first started, it was me leading students through these experiences.
Mhm.
But what I realized, probably because of that coaching aspect to the work that I've done with the charter school, has been that a more valuable resource is for me to coach teachers to create these experiences for their students on their own. And so that's an aspect we're sort of developing right now.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Very helpful. Okay, so the third aspect of your identity, I love that framing, was being a mother, a wife, and I can just interject, also a student at Harvard's Graduate School
Mhm.
of Education. So you're
Yeah,
juggling a lot, Kara.
I am.
Talk a little bit about how you are doing that. And one of the reasons why I appreciate you talking about it is because listeners are out there, whether
Yeah.
they be educators or not, I get a lot of people who are not educators who listen to this podcast are juggling multiple identities. And one of the things that they are trying to figure out in the midst of it is how to manage them while going towards greater things, right? So you are
Yeah.
pouring into this program, you have higher aspirations. How are you doing all of that? What advice would you give to others who are trying to do that also?
I think that focusing on impact really helps me to um, stay connected to the goals. And then, some of the basics, I have a very supportive partner and family. This is actually my last year at the charter school where I'm transitioning out of that in order to do this work with Farm Teach more fully. So there's parts of it that when I started this year at Hugsy, it was like, okay, I can do this for a year, and we'll see where that takes me. So there's a practical reality. There's only so many hours in the day, and so to do a job well with those things, you do have to make difficult decisions sometimes about where you're going to put your time and energy. Um, but I think that impact is what motivates me and keeps me going. I think that, the opportunity to close the opportunity gap um, with students that are coming here to the farm, I'm passionate about that. And I want to see students who might not normally have access to something like this, to these sort of high quality educational opportunities, um, to have access. So I think that's something that really connects with me deeply when I think about why I would be willing to even juggle all of these things for this period of time.
How do you ensure that you don't? It was always important to me when I was doing this work, whether it was going for another degree, or taking a larger leadership role. It was always important to me not to sacrifice uh, those individuals who were closest to me,
Mhm.
my kids, my wife, in my case. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's a real honest question.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you don't do that, if you don't mind sharing?
Part of it is some careful planning. Like we
Mm,
try to block out a day. We have three teenagers, so they have as many things going on as we do. And so sometimes it's looking at the schedule and just saying, all right, where is our 4 hour window when all of us are home? Or
mm,
maybe we get 8 hours together, whatever that might be. I think that is a very practical aspect of it that helps, and then just blocking that on everyone's calendar and saying this is going to be our time to connect. We got to go to Southern California over spring break and tour colleges for my oldest is a junior. And so we just had a wonderful time, just laughing, eating good food, going to the Santa Monica Pier, and just taking advantage of those moments that we have while we still have them, because before we know it, the kids will be out of the house. So I would say having the ability to like take schoolwork and just put it on the shelf for a while and say this will be fine. I'm going to come back to it later. Or take my work with the farm and put it on this shelf and say, no, right now I'm going to knock this paper out. Those are the kinds of things that you have to be able to um, not let all the stuff kind of get to you and just really focus on the thing that's in front of you in that time. But I will say too, Dr. Scott, we ran a program here called Farm School back in 2018, and it so happened that in the midst of this like idyllic, wonderful thing that we were doing, the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in
yeah,
California history, the
yeah.
Camp Fire, came through, and half of our students and half of our teachers lost their homes. Um, and we didn't know what to do, so we opened the farm up to those who were displaced, who needed a place to live. And
Mm,
as beautiful as that was, it took a toll on us. And we started experiencing the impacts of that.
mm,
And I remember a time when it actually we had kind of closed that season, and in the aftermath of that, I started experiencing panic attacks. and
Mhm.
things that I was like, oh, my body is now telling me this was a really hard year.
Yeah.
And so it took kind of slowing down and letting be letting what was really be and
Yeah.
just saying, yeah, this is where I'm at right now. And we have to take a step back as a family to regroup and to breathe and, watch a movie and all the things that just kind of help to like restore that sense of connection. So it's not always a pretty picture. And I think
Yeah.
our bodies even do have a way of telling us when we've crossed that line. And if we're willing to listen, we can find ways to sort of move back.
That's key. If we're willing to listen,
Hmm.
we can find ways and to move back and take care of ourselves, take care of those who are close to us. While simultaneously, the power in that what you just shared is that your family, your community showed up for the crises, right? You were very
Absolutely.
present. You were very present for the crises. And I don't think people who are not in education appreciate this enough. But educators have to be there when
Yeah.
crises happen.
Yeah.
We have to navigate them ourselves. We have to navigate our students, our communities through them.
Hmm.
We don't have an option of not being there. We
Yeah.
don't want that option. But at the same time, it takes its toll. And
Yeah.
so being able to listen to whether it be our bodies or our communities, our families who give us feedback on how things are going, that's really important. And I commend you on doing that. Um,
And I think
yeah,
that
go
if I
ahead.
could just interject, I think that brings us right back around to the role of faith in the
Mm,
lives of educators because we know faith and spiritual practice serves as a protective factor in mental health. And so it gives us that deeper opportunity to address the whole person as educational leaders when we can incorporate those aspects of our identities.
yeah, that's so important. Oftentimes, people don't go there in these public spaces because people have different faith perspectives. It's one of the reasons why where life is doing what it's doing, because I think
Yeah.
people need training, they need supports, they need structures to
Hmm.
understand how to do this really important work at the intersection of faith and education
Yeah.
in a safe way that respects difference, celebrates difference.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's important. Listen, Kara, this has been absolutely amazing. Before I let you go, I usually end with some type of question for our guests, and I'll ask you this question. If someone were to ask you, as I am, one person who has had a significant impact on you as an educator, you can share the person's name, but you don't have to. But what I would appreciate is talking about, as we close, how that person had that impact.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many people in a line of mentors and coaches along the way. But I think that the mentor I mentioned toward the beginning of our time, Rick Sessoms, who uh, really had a very servant leadership model of coming alongside the work that I was doing. I think that I see the thread of that coming into the way that I lead now,
Mm,
as more of a coach than perhaps even um, you might call me a coach more than a leader even. And I think he pulling me sort of from the margin, at least within that denominational space. I would say that has also taught me to look to the margins. And
mm,
while I know we use the word marginalized often to describe people and voices that have been excluded from the center, but there's a lot of research out there, a lot of people writing, like Bell Hooks, one of them I'm thinking of,
mm,
who talk about looking to the margin as a site of possibility. And so I think Rick's example in my life helped not only for me to sort of find my voice and my footing, but also has really taught me to keep looking to the margins as the site of change. And I think that's the kind of transformation that will keep our PK-12 ecosystem healthy and thriving.
And if our PK-12 education ecosystem is healthy and thriving, so will kids be. It
Yeah.
has been an absolute joy having you, Kara. Continue to do the great work that you're doing both in classrooms and in schools and on farms and in churches. And at home. It's great having you.
All the
Thank you so
things.
much.
Yeah.
All the
Thank
things.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Office Hours with Doc. We really appreciate you being with us. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. You are listening to the Office Hours with Doc podcast. We will be right back after this break.
One more time, Doc. Don't look like you're reading it and more enthusiastic.
Okay. You are listening to the Office Hours with Doc podcast. We will be right back after this break.
Amazing.